Picture a room about the size of a large wardrobe. Now fill it with 2 iron beds so close together that if you roll over in the night, your knuckles drag across the wall. Add a ceiling that slopes so low on one side that you cannot stand upright without cracking your skull. A single window no bigger than a dinner plate, and a cold so specific and so relentless that the water in the washing basin doesn't just chill overnight. It turns to a solid disk of grey ice that you have to punch through with your fist every morning at 5 o'clock in the dark before the rest of the house is awake. Add the smell of coal dust and damp wool, and the particular sweetness of bodies that have worked 14 hours without pause. Add the sound of London outside that window, 4 floors below, going about its business completely indifferent to the fact that you exist. That's the attic room. That's where you sleep. That's where we're going tonight. Not to the drawing room with its silk curtains and fireplace that someone else has already lit. Not to the dining room with its chandelier and its 16-place settings. Not to any of the rooms that the family uses, the rooms that show up in paintings and novels and the kind of history that gets written down and taught to children. We're going below that. Below stairs, then above them again, all the way to the top of the house, where the people who make all of it possible spend the 6 hours a night they are permitted to be unconscious. We're going to live one day as a Victorian domestic servant. One full day, from the moment your eyes open in the dark to the moment they close again. Everything you would have seen, everything you would have touched, smelled, carried, scrubbed, polished, and endured. I make these history stories, and I'll be honest with you, I genuinely don't know if you're listening to this to fall asleep, or if you're one of those people who lies awake with the lights off being absolutely fascinated by the fact that someone spent 12 hours a day scrubbing other people's floors and was expected to be grateful for the privilege. Both are valid. I respect both of you enormously. Subscribe if you want. Get comfortable. Here we go. Your eyes open. The room is black. Not dim. Not shadowy. Properly, completely black. The window is too small to let in anything useful, and there are no gas lamps on this side of the house anyway, not up here. The gas is for the family floors. Up here, you use tallow candles, and you used the last of yours 2 nights ago and haven't had a chance to replace them, which means you've been navigating this room by feel and memory for 48 hours. For half a second, you forget where you are. This happens less than it used to, but it still happens. There's a moment, maybe the length of a heartbeat, where you're just a person in the dark, untethered from everything, where you could be anywhere, where you could be back in Shropshire, in the bed you shared with your sister Agnes in the farmhouse, where the cold was also bad but different somehow, a clean cold, a country cold. Not this grey London cold that feels like it has been living in these walls for decades and has given up all hope of warmth. Then it comes back. The smell comes first. Not one smell. Several, layered. The top note is coal dust, which has worked its way into the fabric of everything up here. The blankets, your hair, probably your lungs by now. Under that, the faintly sweet, faintly sour smell of sleep and bodies and yesterday's work that hasn't quite finished sweating out of your skin. Under that, something damp in the plaster near the window. Mildew that the housemaid Cora, who was here before you and left to get married 6 months ago, once told you had been there since before she arrived, which means it's been there at least 3 years. And under all of it, very faintly, the smell of coal smoke coming up from the kitchen ranges 4 floors below, because the kitchen never fully stops, because someone else is already downstairs. Someone is always already downstairs. Welcome to number 14 Chester Square, Belgravia, London, in the autumn of 1887. Your name is Mary Ellen Hobbs. You're 14 years old, and you have been in this house for just over 6 months, which means you have scrubbed approximately 1,800 floors. You work this out sometimes, when you can't sleep, which is most nights, and you have not yet been back to Shropshire, and you will not go back until Christmas if Mrs. Crawford agrees to give you the day, which she has not yet confirmed one way or the other, and the uncertainty of this sits in your chest like a small cold stone that you carry with you everywhere. You swung your feet out from under the blanket. The floor is bare boards, and the cold hits your feet like a physical blow, like stepping into the river in February. You sit on the edge of the bed and breathe for a moment, because if you stand too fast, the dizziness gets you, and you learned that in your second week when you stood too fast and sat back down again, hard enough to wake Ellen, who sleeps in the other bed and who is 18 and has been here 2 years and does not appreciate being woken before 5. Ellen is still breathing the slow, steady breath of someone properly asleep. She gets 10 more minutes. She is a housemaid, which means her work does not begin until the fires, and that is later than yours. You are the scullery maid, which means you are at the bottom of the domestic hierarchy, which means your day begins in the dark, which means you are the one who gets up first, and the cold floor is yours alone. You stand carefully. Your back aches from yesterday, from the positions you hold when you're scrubbing. A particular pull in the lower left side that appeared about 3 months ago and has not gone away. You've stopped noticing it during the day, but it's there every morning, announcing itself the moment you put weight on your feet, like it's been keeping track of the hours and wants to give you a full report. The washing basin is where you left it, on the wooden stand by the window. You find it by memory and by touch, your fingers closing around the cold china rim, and then you reach into it and yes, ice. A solid disc, maybe half an inch thick, with your fingers from last night's washing still faintly impressed into the surface. You make a fist and hit it. It cracks into 3 pieces. The water underneath is so cold it makes your hands ache immediately, and you wash your face quickly, just the necessary minimum, and dry your hands on the towel that hangs on the nail beside the stand. The towel is still damp from yesterday. It is always still damp from yesterday. You stopped thinking about this weeks ago. You dress in the dark, which you can now do in under 4 minutes. Chemise. Stays. You lace these yourself, front lacing, which is why they chose front lacing when they gave you your uniform, because there is no one to help you and no time to ask. Then the print dress, dark blue with a small check, your morning dress. Then the apron, the coarse one, the heavy linen one with no decoration, because where you're going for the first 2 hours, decoration would be ruined before breakfast. You pin your hair up in the dark, 4 pins, feeling for the proper place by the shape of your own head, and then you feel for your cap on the nail where you left it and put it on and adjust it by touch. You pick up your boots from under the bed. They are stiff with cold, and your fingers protest as you do up the laces, but you do it because you do everything that needs doing, and then you pick up the candlestick, empty, no candle, just a habit, and you open the door and step out into the attic corridor. The corridor is also black, but you know this corridor. 6 months of knowing it in the dark. The 3rd floorboard squeaks, so you step over it without thinking. The banister at the top of the stairs has a loose post, 4th from the top so you don't put your weight on it. Your hand finds the wall, and you move along it to the top of the stairs and start down. 4 floors, from the attic to the kitchen, while the house sleeps around you. You pass the family bedrooms on the 2nd floor, and you're as quiet as the house itself. Quieter, because this is one of the rules that isn't written down but is as binding as any rule that is. The family does not hear you. The family does not think about you. The family wakes up in a house that is already warm, already clean, already functional, and the mechanism by which this happens is invisible, and your job is to be part of that invisibility. If they hear you on the stairs at 5 in the morning, you have failed at something important. Not your work. You haven't even started your work yet. You have failed at the more fundamental task of not existing in a way they notice. You've gotten good at this. You've gotten very good at this. Down through the green baize door that separates the family part of the house from the servants' part, and immediately the air changes. The family side smells of beeswax and fresh flowers, and the ghost of last evening's dinner still hanging in the wallpaper. The servants' side smells of coal and cabbage, and the particular institutional smell of a large kitchen in a large house. A smell you have come to associate with the words, "This is your life now," in a way that is not entirely unhappy, but is very, very specific. Mrs. Hartley, the cook, is already in the kitchen. Of course she is. Mrs. Hartley is 43 years old and has been cooking in houses like this since she was 12, which means she has been cooking in houses like this for 31 years, which means she's been doing this longer than most of the family upstairs has been alive, which means she knows things about the ordering of the world that cannot be learned from books and have nothing to do with kindness. She's not a cruel woman. You want to be clear about that. She has never hit you, which is more than some of the girls you've spoken to can say about their cooks. She gives you enough to eat, which is also more than some can say. But she runs her kitchen the way a general runs a campaign, with absolute knowledge of what needs to happen and when, and a level of tolerance for inefficiency that sits somewhere just above zero. She's standing at the main range when you come through the door, already in her working dress, her cap perfectly straight, and she's checking something in a small notebook she keeps in her apron pocket. She doesn't look up. "Black leading," she says. "You hang your coat on its hook." "Yes, Mrs. Hartley." "After that, the copper. Thomas had it last night, but I want you to check the seam." "Yes, Mrs. Hartley." "And the kitchen range needs a proper clean. Not what you did Thursday. A proper one." "You did a proper one Thursday. You don't say this." "Yes, Mrs. Hartley." And then she does look up, briefly, and there is something in her look that is not cruel and is not warm, but is assessing, like she is checking a seam, like she's checking whether you're still what she decided you were the first week when she said to Mrs. Crawford that you were a hard worker, if not a clever one, which you found out from Ellen and have thought about more than is probably useful. Then she looks back at her notebook, and you go to get the black lead. Now let me explain what black leading is, because I need you to understand what your morning looks like. Every morning, before the family comes downstairs, before breakfast is served, before a single cup of tea reaches the dining room, someone has to clean and polish all the cast iron in the kitchen, the range, the fireplace grates in the kitchen and scullery, any other ironwork that has accumulated the grey, ashy, greasy residue of the previous day's cooking and fires. You clean it with a compound called black lead, which is essentially graphite mixed with other things, applied with a small stiff brush, worked in with another brush, and then polished with a third brush until the iron looks not clean exactly. It never looks clean, it's iron, but deep and dark and purposeful, like something that is not finished eating yet. The black lead itself is made in these years by a company in Sheffield, and it comes in small tins, and it smells like something between pencil shavings and river mud. and within 30 seconds of opening a tin your fingers are grey. Within 3 minutes of beginning work, your hands are grey. Within 5 minutes, your apron has a smear of grey across the front and there is a mark on your left cheek where you pushed your hair out of your face with the back of your hand and forgot. The kitchen range at number 14. Chester Square is a Leamington, which is a good range, a modern range, with a central fire and 2 ovens and a hot closet and a boiler for hot water. And it is approximately the size of a small carriage, and it has more ironwork surface area than a country girl from Shropshire can fully prepare herself for. The first time you black-leaded it, it took you 1 hour and 20 minutes, and Mrs. Hartley made you do 1 section again. Now it takes you 45 minutes and you get it right the first time. You start at the top left like always, because that's the way you learned it and because consistency is one of the few things that keeps you from feeling like the work is infinite. Work from the top so the dust and residue falls down onto sections you haven't done yet rather than sections you have. Use the application brush in small circles, not too much compound or it cakes, not too little or it doesn't take. Work it into the seams and the decorative moulding around the firebox doors, which is fiddly and takes a particular angle of the wrist that makes your forearm ache after a while. The kitchen is cold at 5 in the morning, even with the range already lit. The heat radiates out from the firebox but doesn't fill the whole room at this hour. The ceiling is too high and the kitchen is too large, and the cold has had all night to establish itself in the corners and along the flagstone floor, which is the coldest thing in the building. Colder than the attic room, colder than the coal cellar, a cold that comes up through the soles of your boots and settles in your feet and doesn't leave until sometime around mid-morning, when the range has been going for hours and the heat finally reaches the floor. You work. Your breath fogs slightly in the air near the range, but not beside it. The application brush makes a small scrubbing sound, rhythmic, and the range begins to change under your hands, the ashy grey lifting, the deep black emerging underneath it, the iron coming to itself. There is something almost satisfying about this. You have noticed this before and been slightly suspicious of it, the way you can find something satisfying about work that is objectively unpleasant. But there it is. The iron looks better when you're done. It looks intentional. It looks like something that is being cared for. You move section by section. The firebox surround, the oven doors, the decorative panel above the firebox with its embossed scroll pattern that collects dust in every groove and takes the most time, the hot plate, the boiler cover, the small shelf above where Mrs. Hartley rests things when both oven surfaces are full. Your hands are entirely grey now, and the knuckle on your right index finger is slightly raw from where the bristles of the application brush catch it on the inward stroke. This has been happening for 2 months and you've adjusted your grip 6 times, and the raw knuckle persists regardless, and you have decided this is simply what that knuckle is now. Mrs. Hartley is building the fire in the range's central firebox as you work, and the heat is beginning to increase around you, and the cold in your feet is retreating slightly, and London is still dark outside the kitchen window. The window that looks out onto the area, the sunken yard at the front of the house where deliveries are made, where the coal is delivered, where the area steps lead up to the street. And through that window you can see the faintest lightening in the sky, the grey before dawn, which means it is getting toward 6:30. The copper, Mrs. Hartley says, not looking up from the range. You're 2/3 through the ironwork. But the copper is important and she asked you to check it, so you put down the polishing brush and go through to the scullery. The scullery is the room behind the kitchen, and it is your room in the same way that a dog kennel is a dog's room. Technically a room, technically yours to occupy and use, but not designed with your comfort as the primary consideration. It contains a large stone sink, a wooden draining board scarred with years of use, a boiler in the corner that provides hot water for washing, a wooden rack above the sink where things dry, and the copper. The copper is a large circular vessel, like a very deep pan, built into a brick surround in the corner, with its own small firebox underneath. It is used for boiling laundry. It holds approximately 8 gallons of water, and when it is full and fired, it becomes the most powerful source of heat in the lower ground floor, which is useful in winter but requires a particular respect at all times, because the water inside it, when boiling, will peel the skin off your hand to the wrist in under a second if you're careless or unlucky. You were told this your first day. You have not forgotten it. You check the seam that Mrs. Hartley mentioned. There is a hairline crack in the brick surround, not new, but it has opened slightly from last night's heat, and you feel it with your fingertip and decide it needs mortar, and make a mental note to tell Mrs. Hartley. You check the firebox door, which sticks and needs to be opened with a particular upward lift before you pull it toward you. You check the level of ash in the firebox, which is high and will need emptying before the first laundry load goes in. You go back to the kitchen and say to Mrs. Hartley, "The seam on the copper's opening a bit more, and the ash needs emptying before we can use it." She looks up. She actually looks up, which means this is information she wanted rather than information she already knew. Right. Thomas will see to the ash. The seam. Write it in the book. There is a household book kept in the kitchen, a ledger in which minor repairs needed are recorded, and it gets reviewed by Mr. Seymour the butler on Mondays. You go to the shelf where the book lives and write, in the handwriting that is one of the things you have that some of the other girls don't. Your father sent you to the village school until you were 11, which was longer than most. Copper seam opening wider, needs mortar, October 14th, 1887. You date it carefully and replace the book. Then you go back to finish the range. By the time you're done, your back is giving you its full morning report. The knuckle is properly raw, and the range looks exactly as it should. A great, dark, purposeful thing radiating heat into the kitchen. You stand back and look at it for 2 seconds, which is the maximum amount of time you allow yourself to look at a finished thing before moving to the next one, and then you go to the sink to scrub the blacklead off your hands. The water that comes from the tap is cold. Hot water at this stage of the morning means going to the boiler, which requires time, and you don't have time, so you use cold and a hard brush and soap that smells of carbolic and lye, and you scrub until your hands are red and mostly clean again. The grey doesn't fully leave the lines of your knuckles. It hasn't fully left your knuckles in 6 months. You think it might be permanent. You're not particularly troubled by this. Permanent marks of work seem honest somehow, but you notice it. Thomas has appeared. Thomas is the hall boy, 15 years old, from Stepney, with large ears and an air of permanent mild bafflement that you have come to find reassuring. He is setting the servants' hall table for breakfast. The servants eat before they serve the family breakfast, which sounds like a privilege and is, in a minor way, but the reason for it is practical. You cannot serve a family their breakfast if you have not eaten your own, because the work requires function, and function requires fuel, and that is all. Mrs. H. wants the copper ash done, you tell him. I know, he says, not looking up from the table. It needs the firebox door lifted first, then pulled. It sticks if you just pull. I know, he says again, but this time he does look up, and there is a flicker of something grateful in his face that he covers immediately with the bafflement. Thomas does not like to appear as if he needs information, but he always appears as if he needs information, and the two things are in a permanent low-level conflict. You go back to the scullery. There are pots from last night that Thomas was supposed to do and clearly did not finish. 3 large ones, the stock pot, a roasting pan with the residue of last night's lamb, and the fish kettle that is always the worst because fish residue has a tenacity that seems almost personal. You look at them for a moment and allow yourself to feel the very specific feeling of looking at someone else's unfinished work that you know you are going to end up doing. It is a feeling that has no precise name, not exactly anger, and not exactly resignation, a kind of compressed recognition that this is simply how it is and how it will continue to be. Then you fill the sink from the boiler. The boiler is lit now and the water is hot, properly hot, and the steam that rises from the sink when you run the hot water is the most welcoming thing that will happen to you today, this brief warmth on your face and hands. And you put on the rubber apron and you start. The stock pot first, because it is the most straightforward. The residue in the bottom is brown and caramelized and stuck with a determined grip. You fill it part way with hot water and set it on the range to loosen, and while it loosens you start on the roasting pan, which requires the long-handled scrubber and a steel pad and a particular angle of pressure where you keep your elbow up and drive from the shoulder, not the wrist, because the wrist will give out long before the pan is clean. The lamb fat is cold and has set grey and waxy, and when the hot water meets it, it turns milky and slick, and you scrub it away section by section, the steel pad making a sound like something being ground down, which is accurate, and the fat coming off in grey ribbons that you have to keep clearing from the pad. The fish kettle last. The fish kettle is a long oval vessel designed for poaching whole fish, and it has been used for poaching whole fish for approximately 20 years by Mrs. Hartley's estimate, which means it has 20 years of fish residue worked into the seams and the small gap between the inner rack and the outer vessel, and your job is to make it clean enough to use again this evening, for Mrs. Hartley has already told you there will be sole at dinner tonight. You put it in the sink and you pour near boiling water into it and you give it 3 minutes and then you start. Your hands are in water so hot that after a few minutes they stop registering the temperature as pain and register it instead as a kind of emphatic numbness. And you work quickly, getting into the seams with the narrow brush, the inner rack lifted out and scrubbed separately, the lid scrubbed separately, each piece inspected in the grey morning light from the window before it is set on the draining rack. While you're doing this, Mrs. Hartley begins breakfast. A large household in Belgravia in 1887 does not eat a simple breakfast. The family breakfast, for Mr. and Mrs. Pemberton and their 2 daughters and their son home from school for the half-term, includes porridge, kept warm in a double boiler, kidneys and bacon done under the grill of the range, kedgeree, which is a Victorian breakfast staple that you have in 6 months, made approximately 90 times, which means you know that it requires cold-cooked rice, flake smoked haddock, hard-boiled eggs, butter and curry powder, and that Mrs. Pemberton prefers it with more curry powder than Mrs. Hartley uses by default, and that there is a small ongoing negotiation about this which is never directly discussed, but is visible in the slight adjustment of the spoon each morning. Toast, made on a long-handled toasting fork held over the range's top fire, because the Pembertons do not have a mechanical toaster, which exist by 1887, but are not yet universally trusted. Marmalade, butter, and a pot of honey that is refilled from a large jar in the pantry. The tea is made by Jane, the parlour maid, who brings the kettle from the kitchen and carries the tea tray upstairs herself. This is her territory. You do not touch the tea tray. You do not touch anything that goes into the dining room. That is the demarcation line. You end at the kitchen door. Everything beyond it is someone else's province. And while you have stood at that kitchen door and looked through it into the corridor that leads to the front of the house, you have never been through it in working hours. You went through it once, in your 3rd week, because Mrs. Crawford wanted to show you where the front door was in case of an emergency, and you had stood in the entrance hall and looked up at the ceiling with its plaster medallion and its chandelier and felt something that was not exactly awe and was not exactly resentment, but was somewhere between the two, like standing at the edge of a country you have no passport for. But right now you're in the scullery, finishing the fish kettle, and the smells from the kitchen are changing. The neutral morning smell is acquiring layers, kidneys under the grill with a caramelized rich animal smell that makes your stomach respond urgently, and the sweet eggy smell of the kedgeree beginning, and the faintly scorched smell of toast. And your own stomach is informing you with some emphasis that you have not eaten since 6 o'clock last night. You finish the fish kettle, you drain the sink, you take off the rubber apron, you go and wash your hands again. Set the table, Mrs. Hartley says. The servants' hall is a room off the kitchen passage. It has a long table and 8 chairs and a window that looks at the area wall, which is brick, approximately 3 feet away from the glass. The window lets in a kind of reluctant reflected light that is better than nothing, but only slightly. There is a fireplace at one end that is kept lit from October to April, and Thomas has lit it this morning, which means the servants' hall is warmer than the kitchen right now, which means that as you go through to set the table, you feel the warmth increase by several degrees, and you stand in it for a moment, just half a second, just the length of one breath. You set the table. 9 servants in the house at number 14, though not all of them sleep here. Mr. Seymour the butler, who has a room of his own on the lower ground floor because he is the butler. Mrs. Hartley the cook, who also has a room of her own because she is the cook. Mrs. Crawford the housekeeper, who has a small sitting room and a bedroom off the passage behind the kitchen because she is the housekeeper. Ellen and Clara, 2 housemaids. Jane the parlour maid. Thomas the hall boy, who sleeps in the basement passage on a folding bed because there is no other room for him, which Ellen finds deeply unfair on his behalf and says so periodically. Agnes, the lady's maid, who looks after Mrs. Pemberton's clothes and personal needs, and moves through the house in a way that seems to you somehow adjacent to the family, rather than fully part of the servants. She knows things about Mrs. Pemberton's health and moods and habits that no one else knows, and she occupies a particular kind of intimate distance that you find hard to understand. And you, 9 places. The table has a strict geography, which you learned your second day and which you do not deviate from. Mr. Seymour at the head, Mrs. Hartley to his right, Mrs. Crawford to his left, then Jane, then Agnes, then Ellen and Clara on the other side, Thomas at the far end, you at the end nearest the kitchen door. The end nearest the kitchen door is where you sit because you are the one who goes back and forth to the kitchen most during the meal. This is a coincidence of convenience that also happens to be a coincidence of hierarchy, which is one of those arrangements that is so neat you sometimes wonder if the people who designed it were primarily interested in function or primarily interested in something else. The bread is in the kitchen already, a loaf that Mrs. Hartley has cut into even slices, and a small pot of butter. and there is a large pot of porridge because the servants also get porridge, and this morning there are the scraps from the breakfast preparation, a small dish of bacon offcuts, the bits that aren't quite right for presentation on the family table, and a quarter of the kedgeree that Mrs. Hartley made slightly too much of and has decanted into a bowl. You carry these things through and arrange them on the table and pour the water into the jug, and then you sit in your place by the kitchen door and wait. Mr. Seymour comes in last because he is the butler, and this is how it works. He has the newspaper folded under his arm, which is a small signal about who he is and what he is owed, and he sits down and puts the newspaper on the table beside his plate and says, "Good morning," without specifying to anyone in particular, and everyone says, "Good morning, Mr. Seymour." And then there is a collective reaching for the bread, and the general business of eating. You eat porridge and 2 slices of bread and butter and a small amount of kedgeree, and you eat it quickly, not because anyone is rushing you, but because your body has learned to treat food as fuel, and fuel is to be consumed efficiently. In the farmhouse in Shropshire, meals were different. In the farmhouse, meals were slow and noisy, and everyone talked, and the food was your mother's food, simple but particular. A specific way she did potatoes, a specific flavour to her broth that had to do with the herbs she grew in the kitchen garden, and the way she always added the onion last. You haven't had your mother's food since March. Sometimes you think about the potatoes and it doesn't feel like sentimentality. It feels like information your body has asked for and hasn't received. "Lady's maid to attend at 9, Mrs. Crawford says, addressing Agnes across the table. Agnes nods, spreading her bread with a precision that suggests even small acts are performed with attention. "Dinner tonight," Mrs. Hartley says. "I'll need the dining table linens checked this morning, Clara." Clara, 20 years old, fair-haired, from Hammersmith, who's been here 3 years, and who can make a bed so precisely that the corners look architectural. "Yes, Mrs. Hartley." "And someone tell Thomas the coal hole needs the front cleared. I nearly took my ankle off yesterday morning." Thomas, from the far end of the table, not looking up from his porridge. "Sorry, Mrs. Hartley." "I don't want sorry. I want the coal cleared." "Yes, Mrs. Hartley." Mr. Seymour opens his newspaper. The conversation closes like a door. You eat the last of the bread and push your chair back. "Vegetables," Mrs. Hartley says. You go to the kitchen. The vegetables for the day are delivered in the morning by the greengrocer's boy, who comes to the area door at 7 o'clock with a basket that you carry down to the kitchen, and then return to him because the basket belongs to the greengrocer, and you would know this even if you hadn't been told the first time, because the greengrocer's boy, he's about 11, and has a permanently aggrieved expression, and is called, he told you once, William, though he seems to think of this as a fact about him rather than a name, makes a point each morning of watching until you have the basket in your hands before he turns round, as if he thinks you might take it. You have never once wanted to take William's basket, but you understand the logic. Everything in this city is accounted for. Everything belongs to someone. This morning's basket. Potatoes, a lot of them, because there are always a lot of potatoes. Carrots and turnips, which are root vegetables and therefore available and cheap, and Mrs. Hartley uses them for everything. Onions, 3 or 4 of which are slightly soft, and you will need to tell Mrs. Hartley this because using soft onions in the soup, Mrs. Hartley has planned, will give it a flavour she will not want, and will trace back to you if you don't say something. Leeks, celery, a small bunch of parsley, 2 heads of Savoy cabbage. You carry the basket to the kitchen and tell Mrs. Hartley about the soft onions, and she inspects them and removes 2 and says, "Tell William tomorrow." And you note that you will tell William tomorrow, which means you will say Mrs. Hartley says the onions were soft. And William will look aggrieved, which is his only available expression, and will probably say something about the greengrocer not being responsible for what happens to onions after they leave the shop, which is William's standard defensive position, and nothing will change. You begin the vegetables. Potatoes first. There are 17 of them, because 17 people are eating at the dinner table tonight, including the family and guests, and Mrs. Hartley does roast potatoes for this many people in 2 trays, and boiled potatoes in the copper, which means each potato needs peeling and the large ones need halving, and you sit at the kitchen table with the peeling bowl and the knife, and you begin. The knife is a good one. Mrs. Hartley keeps good knives, and the blade is thin and sharp, and the peel comes off in long curling strips if you hold the potato correctly and angle the blade just right. You have gotten much better at this. In March, when you started, your peeled potatoes were smaller than the potatoes you had started with, and Mrs. Hartley had taken one look and said, not unkindly, but not kindly either, "You're wasting more than you're keeping." Now the peel is thin and even, and the potato comes out intact, and the bowl fills with thin curls. 17 potatoes. About 20 minutes at this pace. Then the carrots, which need topping and tailing and scrubbing. Then the turnips, which are harder to peel than carrots because of the way the skin sits, and you have to hold them firmly and use more of the knife's length. Then the onions, the good ones, peeled and halved, and the smell of raw onion in your eyes and nose, which your eyes respond to automatically. A kind of involuntary response that you have learned to blink through rather than pause for, because pausing for every small discomfort is not sustainable across a 14-hour day. While you do this, the kitchen is filling. Ellen comes through, on her way to light the drawing room fire before the family comes down. She's in her morning dress, and her face has the slightly compressed expression of someone who knows they have a lot to do and has arranged themselves accordingly. She pauses at the kitchen door. "Mrs. Hartley, is there any hot water?" "Boiler's been going since 6, Mrs. Hartley says, not looking up from the sauce she's beginning. "Thank you." And she's gone, a small efficient figure disappearing up the back stairs, carrying the coal scuttle and the box of matches and the small basket of fire-setting materials, newspaper twists and kindling, that she will use to lay the fires in the drawing room and morning room and Mr. Pemberton's study before 7:30. When the family begins to come downstairs, and the fires must already be burning, already warm, as if warmth is simply a natural condition of those rooms, as if the cold of early morning had never been there at all. You think, not for the first time, about what it would be like to be the one who makes the mess rather than the one who removes it. Not in a self-pitying way. You were taught, by your mother, by Mrs. Crawford in her initial instructions to you, by the general logic of the situation, that self-pity is expensive and produces nothing useful. But as a factual observation, some people in the world live in rooms where the fire is already lit when they arrive, and some people in the world are the ones who lit it. The first group does not particularly think about the second group, and the second group thinks about the first group less than you might expect, or you do anyway, because you're mostly thinking about what you are doing, which is extensive and specific and requires your full attention, and there isn't much room left over for resentment. Also, and you're honest with yourself about this, some of those rooms are extraordinary. You've seen the drawing room at number 14 Chester Square once, on a Sunday afternoon in September, when the family was in the country for a week, and Mrs. Crawford took you through the house to show you what needed extra attention while they were away. The drawing room is on the first floor at the front of the house, and it has 3 windows overlooking the square, and it has a ceiling with plaster mouldings in patterns of flowers and fruit, and it has a fireplace surround of white marble with a mirror above it that doubles the room, and it has a carpet in blues and golds that is so thick your feet sink into it slightly when you walk on it, which you noticed and which you remember with a specificity that surprises you, the specific memory of that sinking feeling underfoot, the specific difference between that and the flagstone floor of the scullery. There is a piano in the drawing room. One of the daughters, Miss Catherine, who is 17 and has her mother's narrow face and her father's dark eyes, plays it in the evenings sometimes when you're still in the kitchen and the sound comes down through the floors. Chopin, you think, though you only know this because Agnes once said, descending to the kitchen for something and hearing the music, Miss Catherine's doing her Chopin again, in a tone of mild sufferance, as if she had heard rather too much Chopin. The music comes through the floors muted and slightly remote, like something heard from the far side of a hill, and it doesn't bother you. You find it, on the contrary, oddly pleasant in those hours when the kitchen is slightly quieter and the work is mechanical and your hands are busy and your mind is semi-free. To have music somewhere above you, even music that is arriving through 3 floors and 2 carpets, and a certain amount of Victorian construction. But this is the morning, and Miss Catherine is asleep, and the piano is silent. You finish the vegetables. You carry the various bowls and boards to Mrs. Hartley, and she distributes instructions for each one. Potatoes for roasting go in a pot of cold water by the range, potatoes for boiling same, carrots and turnips to be used in the stock that is being built toward tonight's soup, onions for braising, cabbage for later. You do these things. You move between the kitchen and the scullery in a pattern that you've internalized so thoroughly that it no longer requires active thought. There is a route, and you take it, and you anticipate the next step before the current one is complete. And this is what efficiency looks like when it lives in your body rather than your head. Breakfast for the family goes up at 8 o'clock. You do not take it up. Jane takes the trays up, and Thomas takes the hot dishes in their covered serving dishes, and you watch this from the kitchen doorway. The brief parade of covered silver, the smell of kidneys and bacon and fresh toast, the ceremony of it. And then they are gone through the green baize door, and the kitchen becomes quieter, and Mrs. Hartley has a cup of tea and reviews her notebook. You go back to the scullery and begin on the breakfast dishes as they come down. This is the rhythm. Things go up, things come down. Everything that goes up clean comes down dirty. Your job is the distance between those two states. You are the mechanism by which a dirty dish becomes a clean one, a clean kitchen becomes dirty one, and then a clean one again. A cold house becomes a warm one, and then, while everyone is asleep, a cold one, and then warm again. You are the part of the process that makes the process invisible. The breakfast dishes come down in batches, the porridge pot sticky with cooked oats that have had 30 minutes to set into something approaching cement, which you manage with very hot water and patience. The egg cups, which only need a rinse. The bacon platter, greasy. The kedgeree dish, with its yellow residue of rice and egg and curry that actually smells pleasant even as you wash it. The toast rack. The butter dish. The cups and saucers and teapot, which belong to the good breakfast service, and a fine china with a blue and white floral pattern, and which you hold carefully, not with excessive caution, but with a particular quality of attention, because fine china costs money, and broken china costs you more than money, and you knew this before you started, and the knowing of it is always present in your hands when you hold it. Mr. Seymour brings the newspaper back through after the family has finished. He sets it on the hall table in the passage, where it will be taken by whoever picks it up first, which is usually Thomas, who cannot actually read it with any fluency, but treats possession of it as a status symbol. You watch Mr. Seymour's back disappear through the kitchen passage and you think, not for the first time, that he is a man who has built a life out of the practice of being exactly correct. Every button, every movement, every decision, precisely calibrated. He is kind to you when kindness is required and not unkind when it isn't, which is a form of fairness that you have come to appreciate, because some butlers, the other girls have told you, are not fair in this way, and the unfair ones make the whole structure of the house shift in uncomfortable directions. By 9 o'clock the breakfast washing is done and the kitchen is being laid toward the morning's cooking, and you have swept the scullery floor and scoured the sink and checked that the boiler is still drawing properly, and emptied the ash from the firebox at the base of the boiler and carried the ash up to the ash can in the area, which involves 3 steps up and a door that sticks and the cold air of the area hitting your face after an hour of kitchen heat, and the cold feels briefly like relief, like something that is not demanding anything of you. Then back down, back to the kitchen. Mrs. Hartley's making pastry and needs the marble slab wiped, which you wipe, and the flour canister checked, which you check and find low enough to mention. You go to the store cupboard off the kitchen passage and carry a new bag of flour to the kitchen. The bag weighs about 7 pounds. In a day, between the kitchen and the scullery and the coal and the water and the ash, you carry things of approximately this weight approximately 30 times. You do not think about this as a total. You think about it one at a time. 1 bag of flour, 1 scuttle of coal, 1 pot of stock, 1 tray of vegetables. One at a time is manageable. As a total, it seems like something that shouldn't be possible, so you don't add it up. The morning moves. At 10 o'clock there is a small crisis when the sauce Mrs. Hartley is making for tonight's first course breaks. Separate suddenly in the pan, the butter and stock splitting into an oily puddle with pale lumps floating in it. And Mrs. Hartley says one word, very quietly, that you have not previously heard her say in 6 months, which tells you the severity of the crisis. You stand very still and do not offer any suggestions because you're 14 and she is 43, and she knows things about sauce that you will not know for 20 years, if ever, and your role in this moment is to be useful if asked and invisible if not. She is asked internally by herself, and she moves with a speed and assurance that makes the next 4 minutes look almost like a performance. A cold pan, a new base, the broken sauce introduced slowly with a whisk, and the whole thing coming back together into something smooth and pale and glossy. And when it is done, she tastes it and says more tarragon, and adds tarragon and tastes it again and says nothing, which is her highest form of approval. You have watched her do things like this many times, and you feel about it what you feel about the range after the black leading is done. A kind of recognition of a thing being right, of something that was wrong being made right through application of specific knowledge and skill. You think sometimes that Mrs. Hartley's skill is genuinely extraordinary, that the family upstairs, eating her dinner tonight with their guests, will think about the courses in the way you thought about the drawing-room ceiling, with appreciation for the result and no particular curiosity about the process, and that the process involves, among other things, a sauce that nearly broke and was saved by someone who's been doing this for 31 years and who knows, at the level of reflex, what to do when it goes wrong. You do not say any of this to Mrs. Hartley. You go and check on the stock. Here is something about working in a Victorian kitchen that I want you to understand, because it is one of the things that shapes the whole shape of your day. The food never stops. It doesn't pause. It doesn't take a break. A large household dinner requires preparations that begin in the morning and continue through luncheon and through the afternoon and into the evening, each stage dependent on the previous one, each element requiring its own attention at its own particular moment. The stock that you are now checking needs to have simmered for 6 hours before it can be strained and used in the soup. The pastry that Mrs. Hartley is making needs at least 2 hours of resting in the cold larder before it can be rolled and used for the savoury tarts that are one of tonight's removes. The haunch of beef for the main course has been hanging in the meat safe since Monday and needs to be taken down this morning and trimmed and larded and started on the spit at 4 o'clock to be ready for 7. Everything overlaps with everything else. Everything is simultaneously in progress at a different stage. You move through this overlap as a specific cog in a specific machine, doing your pieces, and Mrs. Hartley holds the whole structure in her head, the entire temporal map of a dinner party for 17, every single dish and its stage of preparation, and she does this every working day as a matter of straightforward professional function, and she does it while simultaneously adjusting for broken sauces and soft onions, and the fact that Thomas didn't empty the coal hole, and the greengrocer's boy brought slightly too few leeks. You check the stock. It is simmering correctly. Small lazy bubbles just breaking the surface. The colour a deep gold. The smell rich and complex. Layers of roasted bone and vegetable and herbs. You skim the small amount of grey foam that has come up and ladle a small amount into a spoon and taste it, because Mrs. Hartley has been teaching you this, the habit of tasting things you're responsible for so you can report accurately, and the stock tastes of depth and time, the particular taste of patience, which is not a poetic description but an accurate one. Long-cooked things taste different from short-cooked things, and the difference is time, and time is what you have given this. Good, you tell Mrs. Hartley. She glances at you. Still needs 2 hours, she says. I know, you say. And for a moment, a very brief moment, the kind that doesn't last long enough to have a name, there is something between you that is not warmth exactly, and is not approval exactly, but is something in the direction of mutual recognition. The recognition of two people who are doing a thing properly and both know it. Then she turns back to her pastry, and the moment is done. At 11, Mrs. Crawford comes into the kitchen. Mrs. Crawford is the housekeeper, and the housekeeper is the most powerful person below stairs except for the butler, and in some respects more powerful, because the housekeeper controls the domestic staff more directly. She's 51 years old, and she's been a housekeeper since she was 32, and before that she was a parlour maid, and before that a housemaid, and before that, presumably, something else, though you have never heard her mention a time before she was in service, and you have the feeling that she, like Mr. Seymour, has constructed her identity out of the role so thoroughly that the role has become the only identity that is available for inspection. She is carrying her small bunch of keys, the housekeeper's keys, which open the store cupboard and the wine cellar and the linen cupboard and various locked cabinets around the house. And she has her household book under her arm, and she's looking at something in the book as she comes through the door, and she says without looking up, "Mary." "Ma'am." "The second bedroom fireplace is smoking. I need you to go up and check the flue." You look at Mrs. Hartley, who gives the smallest of nods, meaning, "Yes, go, I can spare you for this." You wipe your hands and follow Mrs. Crawford out of the kitchen, up the back stairs, the servant stairs, narrow, uncarpeted, running up the back of the house from the lower ground floor to the attic, through the green baize door, up to the first floor, along the landing. The second bedroom is the room used by Miss Catherine. It is empty now. She will be in the morning room or the garden or wherever young ladies of 17 spend their weekday mornings in autumn. But the evidence of her occupancy is everywhere. Clothes set out on a chair, a book open face down on the bedside table, a small cluster of bottles and jars on the dressing table. You allow yourself one long look as you come through the door. Because you have been upstairs perhaps 4 times in 6 months and the rooms are still, not quite shocking, but still possessed of a quality of otherness that your body registers without your entirely asking it to. The ceiling is the first thing. It is much higher than any ceiling you grew up with, and even higher than the servants' hall and kitchen. The plasterwork in the centre has a small wreath pattern. The fireplace is smaller than the drawing-room one. A bedroom fireplace, marble surround in cream and grey, the grate of polished iron. The carpet underfoot is not as deep as the drawing-room carpet, but is soft, and there is a rug in front of the fireplace that is actually, you notice, very beautiful, dark red with a pattern of stylist flowers, Turkish probably, though you don't know enough about carpets to be sure. You go to the fireplace and look up the flue. The problem is immediately visible. A bird's nest, or the remnants of one, has partially blocked the throat of the chimney, and some of the debris has fallen down onto the damper plate. You can see daylight through the narrow channel around it, but not enough to draw properly, which is what makes it smoke. You clear the debris from the damper plate with a brush from the fireplace set, and use the long-handled flue brush to push the remnants of the nest upward through the throat. It goes, reluctantly, and then falls behind the baffle into the chimney proper, and the draw improves immediately. You can feel it, the slight increase in the pull of air against your face. You test the damper, open and close it twice, and the mechanism is working. It was a nest, you tell Mrs. Crawford, who has waited in the doorway with the patience of someone who is used to waiting while things are dealt with. I've cleared it. Should draw all right now. Good. She makes a note in her book. When you go back down, tell Mrs. Hartley I've spoken to the sweep about a winter clean, but he can't come until the 22nd. Yes, ma'am. You follow her back to the landing. She goes toward the front of the house. You go back through the green baize door, down the servants' stairs, and when you pass through the baize door, the temperature drops perceptibly. The family floors are warmer, even in the morning, and the carpet under your feet becomes bare-board, and you are back. Back in the kitchen, you tell Mrs. Hartley about the sweep, and Mrs. Hartley says, "About time," in a tone that suggests the negotiation about the sweep has been ongoing for longer than you have been in this house. And she hands you a bowl of carrots that needs scraping, and you sit at the table and start. Luncheon for the servants is at 12:30. Cold meat from Monday, bread, a piece of hard cheese, a pot of mustard. You eat it in 12 minutes. You're hungry, and the food is food, and that is the transaction. The afternoon is different from the morning, in the way that the afternoon is always different from the morning in a house this size. The crisis energy of the morning, getting the family fed, getting the house running, getting the 1,000 urgent things of the early hours done, has settled into the steadier work of sustaining a system that is now in motion. The stock has been strained and is ready. The pastry has been resting. The beef has been brought down from the meat safe and is being prepared. The kitchen is warm now, properly warm, the ranges at full operation, the heat genuinely present rather than merely promised. And if you stand at the right spot near the main range, your back gets warm, really warm, and the constant ache in the lower left side retreats slightly, just enough to notice. Mrs. Hartley has you make the short crust for the jam tarts at 2 o'clock. This requires explanation. The making of pastry is not typically scullery work. It is kitchen work, cook's work, and the fact that Mrs. Hartley has you do it tells you something about where you stand after 6 months, which is somewhere between where you were and where you might eventually be. Not a cook, not trained as a cook, but someone who has been watched carefully enough that she is trusted with this particular piece of kitchen work on this particular afternoon when there is too much else to do. She watches you for the first 5 minutes and says nothing, which you have learned to interpret as provisional approval. She checks the texture of the fat and flour when you've rubbed them together. You hold the bowl out to her, and she runs a handful through her fingers and says, "More rubbing," and you rub more and hold it out again, and she doesn't say anything, which means it's right. The water goes in a tablespoon at a time, you turning the mixture with the knife the way she showed you. Not kneading, just turning until it comes together. And the moment when it comes together has a specific quality that you can feel through the knife and the bowl in your wrist. A shift from crumbly to cohesive, and you stop exactly there. And when Mrs. Hartley checks it, she presses it gently with one finger and nods once. "Cold larder, 1 hour," she says, and you take the wrapped pastry to the small cold room off the kitchen passage, where the temperature is kept several degrees below the kitchen, and you put it on the marble shelf and close the door. In the hour that the pastry rests, you scrub the kitchen table. The table is a large rectangular deal table, pale wood, and it has been in this kitchen for at least 20 years, and its surface bears the marks of those 20 years, in a way that is actually interesting if you let yourself look at it. The knife scores, the burn marks from hot pots, the stains of 35,000 meals worth of preparation. You scrub it with the hard brush and the hot water and the carbolic soap, and the surface comes clean in the sense that it is no longer bearing today's residue, but it is still itself, still scored and marked and particular, and you think, working the brush in long strokes from one end to the other, that tables like this have a kind of biography, that the marks on them are a record of all the work that has happened on them, that someone in 20 years will scrub this same table and be scrubbing across your marks too, and you find you don't mind this. You find it is actually a satisfying thought, that the work leaves a record even when the person doing the work is invisible. At 3 o'clock you hear footsteps above you. Not unusual. The family moves through the house all afternoon, but these footsteps are specific. Lighter than Mrs. Pemberton, heavier than Miss Catherine, with a pause at the head of the backstairs. You know these footsteps. They are Miss Harriet's, the younger daughter, who is 12 years old and who does a thing that none of the other family members do, and that Mrs. Crawford has spoken to Mrs. Pemberton about twice, with no definitive resolution. She comes downstairs, not to the kitchen exactly. She stops at the green baize door and she pushes it open slightly and she looks through the gap, and you can see her eye, very dark blue, like her father's, in the gap between the door and the frame. And then she comes through, and she is standing in the servants' passage. This is not allowed. Children of the house do not come below stairs. This is one of the house's clearest rules, unwritten but absolute. And Miss Harriet knows this and comes anyway about twice a week, with an expression of combined guilt and determination that you have come to find, despite yourself, rather charming. "Hello, Mary," she says. "Miss Harriet, you're already looking toward the kitchen door, calculating the likelihood of Mrs. Hartley emerging." "I'm not supposed to be here." "No, Miss Harriet, I know." She holds this responsibility with a kind of philosophical equanimity. "Is there anything left from luncheon? I'm awfully hungry and Mama says I can't have anything before tea, and tea isn't until 4. You look at her. 12 years old, in a white pinafore over a blue dress, her dark hair in 2 plaits, her boots without a single scuff, because Agnes polishes everything, including the children's boots, to the same standard she polishes Mrs. Pemberton's. She looks, standing in the servants' passage, slightly alarmed by her own presence here, like a person who has walked into the wrong room and is now committed to seeing it through. You go to the cold larder. You come back with a heel of bread and a small piece of cold chicken that is genuinely left from luncheon and is not needed for anything else. Or, go back upstairs, Miss Harriet. She takes the bread and the chicken and gives you a smile of such genuine, uncomplicated gratitude that it is entirely disarming, and you find yourself almost smiling back, and then she is gone, back through the baize door, her footsteps ascending, and you are standing in the passage with nothing in your hands. Mrs. Hartley is standing in the kitchen doorway. There is a silence that has the quality of a held breath. The chicken won't be missed, you say. Mrs. Hartley looks at you for a long moment. Her face is doing nothing that you can interpret clearly. Then she turns back to the kitchen. Don't let her make a habit of it, she says. You go back to work. 4 o'clock. The light through the area window is already failing. October in London means the dark comes early and thoroughly, and by 4:30 the area will be in shadow, and by 5 it will be black. And the kitchen, which has only gas lighting, will be running entirely on that yellow-white artificial light that makes everything look slightly more serious than it actually is. The beef has been on the spit for an hour, and Thomas is turning it every 15 minutes, which is one of his tasks this afternoon, and it is filling the kitchen with a smell so specific and so excellent that it seems almost cruel. The smell of long-roasting beef, fatty and rich, and with a slight caramelized quality on the outside and a raw depth still coming off the centre, and the smell of the drippings pan below it where the fat is collecting in small amber pools. You are not having beef tonight. The servants are having leftover mutton and some of the soup that doesn't quite reach the standard Mrs. Hartley wants for the dining table. You do not resent this in the way that you might resent it if you thought about it as an injustice. You think about it instead as a fact of the kitchen's economy, which is more functional. The beef is for the dining table. The dining table is for the Pembertons and their guests. You're not a Pemberton and you are not a guest. Therefore, mutton. The soup needs finishing. Mrs. Hartley has you take over at the soup while she moves to the pastry cases, which have come out of the cold larder and are now ready to be lined and blind baked. And you stand at the range with the soup pot and a wooden spoon, and you taste and adjust, the way she's shown you. Salt in careful small amounts, a turn of white pepper, a small addition of cream from the jug Mrs. Hartley has measured, and left on the shelf above the range. The soup is a clear consommé with very thin sliced vegetables, and you have to keep the temperature exact. Too hot, and it will cloud, losing the clarity that is one of its required qualities for a first-course soup. And you keep the temperature exact, watching the surface for the small trembling that means it is right. The movement just below boiling, and you make the adjustments and you taste it every 5 minutes and you think, this is good. Mrs. Hartley tastes it at 4:20 and says, add the rest of the cream. You add it. It is better. The flavour rounds. Good, she says. She has said this twice today. In 6 months she has said it perhaps 30 times in total. You know the value of this the way you know the value of the thin-shaved peel, by contrast with the alternative. At 5 o'clock the kitchen becomes something else. It is the same room, the same range, the same stone floor, but the energy changes. The preparation that has been building all day begins its conversion into execution, and the pace increases, and there is a quality to the air in a kitchen 90 minutes before a formal dinner that is unlike any other quality of air you've been in. It is concentrated. It has intention in it. Every person in the kitchen is moving with purpose, and the purposes are all coordinated, and the coordination is Mrs. Hartley, who has stopped consulting her notebook and is running the kitchen from memory and from a sense of timing that seems to operate below conscious thought. She knows when things are ready not by checking them but by knowing, and the rare time she does check it is because something concerns her, and when something concerns Mrs. Hartley, you pay attention because her concern is calibrated. You are on the vegetables. You have moved from preparation to execution. The potatoes that have been soaking are now roasting in 2 trays in the main oven, having been parboiled first and roughed up with a fork and put into the sizzling fat, and the sound they make in the oven is a sound of intent, a spitting and crisping sound that means things are happening at the right temperature. The carrots and turnips are braising in a covered pan. The leeks are ready for the steam. The cabbage is already shredded and in a bowl with butter ready to go in the pan when Mrs. Hartley says go. Thomas is running. This is literally true. Thomas tonight is moving between the kitchen and the serving area at something close to a trot, carrying things, returning, carrying other things. His ears very red and his expression elevated from bafflement to a kind of concentrated alarm that is actually, you find, somewhat endearing. This is the first dinner party Thomas has worked in his 2 months in this house. You only know this because he told you this morning, when you were setting the servants' table, in a tone of extreme casualness that was covering something much more anxious. Jane is upstairs already, attending to the dining room with Clara. Mr. Seymour has been invisible since 4 o'clock, which means he is either in his pantry doing things to the silver, or he's in the dining room doing things to the glasses, both of which require the kind of focused privacy that means no one goes near him. The guests start arriving at 7. You know this because you can hear, even from the kitchen, the sound of the front door opening and closing multiple times between 7 and past, and the sound of voices in the hall, not words, just the shape of voices, arriving and greeting. Female voices higher and then the lower register of Mr. Pemberton welcoming someone. And once, very distinctly, laughter, a woman's laugh with a particular carrying quality that comes through the floors and the walls and the air and arrives in the kitchen as a reminder that there is a party happening above you. You do not go to look. This is not something you consider. You're in the middle of the potatoes and the leeks and the exact point at which the cabbage needs to go in the pan, and you are where you need to be, doing what you need to do, and the party above you is as present and as irrelevant as the piano music. It is there, it is real, and it has nothing to do with what is in your hands. At 7:15, Mrs. Hartley says, "First course up." The soup goes up in its tureen, carried by Thomas, with Mr. Seymour appearing from nowhere to check the surface of the soup with one brief inspection look before nodding. And Thomas goes through the kitchen door and up the back stairs, and you hear the door close and the kitchen is briefly one person less. And then the pace of the kitchen doesn't change because there is no spare pace available. The pastry cases are out of the oven. The filling goes in. Mrs. Hartley does this herself. She has not trusted this to you, and you understand why. The filling is complex and delicate, and the visual presentation of it matters in a way that the behind-the-scenes work doesn't. and the cases go back under the grill for 2 minutes and come out and are examined and go up on the second tray, and Thomas has reappeared and takes them and goes again. The beef is coming off the spit. This is a 2-person operation, Thomas and Mrs. Hartley, and you clear the counter for them, and they bring the joint across. It is large, the size of a small child's torso, brown and glistening, the fat rendered and crisped. The smell now so overwhelming that it has displaced everything else in the room, and Mrs. Hartley makes the first cut with a long-bladed carving knife, and the steam rises from the pink interior, and she looks at it and says nothing, which means it is right. You are doing the vegetables while she carves. The potatoes out of the oven, shaken back in the fat, salted out onto the serving dishes. The carrots and turnips out of their braising liquid, arranged in the serving dish. The leeks are a bit overcooked on one side, and you turn the serving out so the right side is up, and you say nothing because it is not catastrophic, and no one is going to examine the bottom of the leeks. The cabbage goes in the pan and the butter sizzles, and you watch it and keep it moving, and it comes out at exactly the right moment, still with a faint bite to it, not sodden, dark green at the edges from the heat but not burned. Cabbage, Mrs. Hartley says. You put it in the dish. It is where it needs to be. The serving dishes go up. The noise from the kitchen is at its most concentrated for the next 20 minutes. The brief window between when courses go up and when they come back down. And in this window, Mrs. Hartley is simultaneously beginning the preparation for the next course and checking that everything is as it should be, and you are washing the pots that are no longer needed in an ongoing effort to manage the pile in the scullery. And Thomas is going up and down the back stairs with the focused look of a person who has decided not to think and to just move. And Mr. Seymour comes through twice with specific requests. More of the sauce. One of the guests has asked for plain boiled vegetables. And each time there is a brief, efficient exchange, and then the thing is provided and he is gone. This is the dinner service. This is what it looks like from below. Above you, 17 people are eating and talking and being waited on. And the food is arriving at the right temperature, in the right order, in the right quantities, and the whole experience of the evening is, for the guests, one of those experiences that seems simply to exist, seems to be generated by the house itself, by the quality of the Pembertons as hosts, by the natural abundance of a prosperous household in one of London's best addresses. Below you, in the kitchen and the scullery and the passage between them, the mechanism that produces this experience is operating at full capacity, and it is loud and hot and physical and complex, and it involves the specific knowledge of 31 years of cooking and the specific stamina of a 14-year-old girl who's been on her feet since 5 in the morning. The dessert goes up at 8:30. You do not make the dessert. That was Mrs. Hartley yesterday and this morning, the elaborate ice pudding that has been setting in the ice chest since noon. But you carry the ice chest to the serving area, and you hold it while Thomas extracts the pudding onto the serving dish, and you see the pudding, pale, shaped, elaborate, a thing of such deliberate beauty that it seems almost abstract. And you think, someone will eat that in about 10 minutes, without any particular thought about how it came to be there, or what is required to make ice pudding, or what the ice chest weighs, or who carried it. And then you carry the ice chest back to the kitchen, and you begin on the main course pots. You will tell me about the end of the evening. No, actually, let me tell you. Because this is where the day becomes something specific and important, and where what you are, your age, your body, the fact that you're 14 years old and have been working since 5 in the morning, becomes the most relevant thing. By 9 o'clock, you have been on your feet for 16 hours. I need you to understand what that means physically, not as a number, as an experience. Your feet stopped being distinct sensations around mid-afternoon and have merged into a general foundation of ache that extends up through your calves and into the backs of your knees. The lower left back, which announced itself at 5 this morning, has been reporting in with increasing specificity throughout the day, and now, at 9 in the evening, it is not a pain exactly, but a pressure. A constant pressure, like something leaning against you from the inside. Your hands are red. They are always red in the evenings from the water and the heat and the work, and the knuckle on your right index finger is fully raw now. And when hot water hits it, it produces a sharp, specific sensation that you have stopped registering as a reason to slow down. Your shoulders ache from the carrying, not both shoulders equally, the right more than the left, because you are right-handed, and you lead with your right when you're carrying heavy things. You're tired in a way that has passed through the usual meanings of the word into something more specific. You're tired in your eyes, which feel slightly dry and are slow to track from one thing to the next. You're tired in your hands, which still do their work correctly but are slightly delayed. The knife, when you reach for it, takes half a second longer than it did this morning to be in the right grip. You're tired in your thinking, which is not confused but is simplified. You are thinking in single steps rather than sequences, doing the next thing rather than planning the next 3 things, which is how your mind protects itself from the fact that you've been in motion for 16 hours, and there is still an hour of work to go. The dinner dishes come down throughout the evening. The family is lingering over dessert and coffee. You can tell because the rate at which things return to the kitchen has slowed, and the servants have eaten their dinner in the servants' hall, which you ate in 9 minutes, and which was perfectly adequate. And now you are back in the scullery with the accumulated evidence of 17 people's dinner, and working through it with the methodical thoroughness that is the only way to get through it. The dinner plates first. They come down in batches of 4 or 5. The residue of the main course, a few leaves of wilted cabbage, a smear of sauce, the darkened fond from a piece of beef, a small mound of potato that someone left on their plate for reasons that are not your concern. You scrape each plate into the scraps bucket with the rubber spatula, and stack the scraped plates in the rack, and then wash them in batches in the hot water that you keep replenishing from the boiler, and you rinse them and rack them, and this is the discipline of the evening. Maintain the temperature of the water, maintain the speed of the washing, maintain the quality of the rinse, because inadequately rinsed dinner plates show spotting, and spotting reflects badly on the household, specifically on the person responsible for the washing, specifically on you. The serving dishes next. Heavier, obviously, and with more complex residue. The congealed fond in the bottom of the roasting pan, which has been through 2 hours of heat and is now set hard. The gravy boat with its sticky interior, the vegetable dishes with their traces of butter and braising liquid. These take longer. The roasting pan takes the longest. You fill it with near boiling water and leave it on the range to re-loosen the fond and work on other things while it soaks. And when you come back to it, the fond has loosened and comes off in sheets under the long scrubber, brown and savoury, and you think, briefly, tiredly, that this would taste good, this residue, and then you rinse the thought away with a pan. At 9:45, Ellen appears at the scullery door. She looks at you and looks at the pile of dishes, and she says, with the practical directness of someone who has been where you are, "How much left?" "Half hour, you estimate." She nods. She's been at this almost as long as you have, managed in the family rooms all evening, and she has her own work to finish. The drawing room to be straightened after the guests leave, the fire screens to be reset, the small tasks of an evening in service. But she has half an hour before the guests start departing, and she picks up a drying cloth. She doesn't ask if you need help. She just starts drying. You wash. She dries. The pile diminishes with the speed that is genuinely perceptible. One person doing a job is a different thing from two people doing a job, even when both people are tired, even when one of them is wearing a drying cloth over a dress that was immaculate this morning and is not immaculate now. You work in a silence that is not uncomfortable. The sound of water and china and the cloth and the rack filling the scullery with a rhythm that has its own quality, almost like music in the way it is patterned and continuous, and the pile goes down, and at 10:05 the last dish is rinsed and racked, and Ellen puts down the drying cloth. "Thank you," you say. "Don't make a face about it," she says, which is not a refusal of the gratitude, but is Ellen's way of receiving it, which is characteristic of her and which you've gotten used to. She goes back to the drawing room and you go back to the kitchen. Mrs. Hartley is at the range, and the range is being banked for the night. The fire's damped, the draft reduced, the whole system pulled back from full operation to the overnight state, which maintains enough heat to keep things warm and the boiler going but doesn't burn through coal. You help with this, banking the fires in the precise order she shows you, and the kitchen temperature, which has been at maximum for 6 hours, begins slowly to fall. The kitchen at the end of the day is a specific kind of place. All the evidence of the day's work is present in a transformed state. Everything that was raw is cooked. Everything that was dirty is clean. Everything that was in preparation is in completion. The serving dishes are on the rack. The pots are stacked. The surfaces are wiped. The floor has been swept, and you will do a proper mop in the morning, but for now it is swept. The range is banked and breathing slowly. The smell is the residue of everything that has been cooked today, complex and deep. A whole day's work present in the air. Mrs. Hartley wipes her hands on her apron, a gesture you've seen her do at the end of every day, a gesture that seems like a kind of punctuation, the physical equivalent of a full stop. "Good work today," she says. You look at her. This is different from the "good" she said this afternoon. This is a sentence. "Thank you, Mrs. Hartley." She's already moving toward her room. She is tired in the way that she is always tired at the end of the day, which is a controlled tired. The tiredness of a person who has been professional about it all day and is now, in private, allowed to be something else. You will not see it happen. She will close her door and be tired on her own, and tomorrow she will be in the kitchen at 5 o'clock, and she will say whatever she needs to say, and the day will begin. You go to the servants' hall. Thomas is there, slumped in his chair with a specific posture of someone who has physically collapsed into furniture rather than sat. His large ears are still red. He has a piece of bread in his hand that he is eating without particular attention. "First dinner party," you say. "Never again," he says. "There's one in 3 weeks. He looks at you. He processes this. He takes a bite of bread. "Never again," he says. You go to the back stairs, up through the floors of the house, 1 flight, 2 flights, 3, the carpet of the upper floors becoming bare-board at the attic stairs, the temperature dropping with each flight, the sounds of the house changing as you climb, from the working sounds of the lower floors, the lingering warmth of the kitchen, through the gentler evening sounds of the family floors where the guests are still in the drawing room. You can hear their voices, a murmur, a laugh, the piano beginning. Miss Catherine playing something quiet and final sounding, and then above all of that, Above the piano and the voices and the warm carpeted hallways, the attic stairs, uncarpeted, steep, and at the top, the door to the corridor and the door to your room. You open the door. Ellen is not here yet. She will come up when the guests leave, when the drawing room is done. You have the room to yourself for a while. You stand just inside the doorway and you look at it. You've been awake and working for 17 hours, and you're standing in a room that is approximately the size of a large wardrobe, and you feel, standing in it, something that is not exactly warmth. This room being far too cold for warmth, but is something in the direction of it. Something that has to do with it being yours, with it being the specific destination that the whole day has been moving toward in the same way that a river moves toward the sea, with the fact that this is the place where the day stops. The window. You go to the window. The window is small, 9 inches by 14, set into the slope of the ceiling, and from it you can see a portion of the night sky and a portion of the city. The sky over London in 1887 is not a clear sky, has not been a clear sky in any meaningful sense for decades. The coal smoke and the gas smoke and the smoke of 4 million people doing all the things that 4 million people do makes a perpetual haze that turns the sky above the city a particular colour at night. A deep amber brown, lit from below by the gas lamps and from above by nothing you can identify. A colour that exists nowhere else, and is one of the things that people who've lived in London for a long time carry away with them as a piece of involuntary memory. You can see, through the window, a small piece of Chester Square itself, the iron railings of the garden, the gas lamp at the corner still burning, casting its circle of yellow light on the wet pavement. A cab is passing. You can hear the sound of the horse's hooves on the wet street before you see it, and then it passes through the edge of what the window shows you and is gone. Someone on the pavement opposite, walking quickly, collar up, head down, going somewhere in the way that people in London always seem to be going somewhere with a sense of existing purpose. The gas lamp is beautiful. You have noticed this before, but you notice it again. The specific beauty of a gas lamp on a wet night, the way the light catches in the surface of the wet pavement and doubles, the corona of light that hangs in the damp air around the lamp itself, the way the shadows of the railings are printed on the ground in patterns that shift very slightly as the gas flame moves. There's no reason to find this beautiful. It is a lamp on a street in a city you did not choose to live in, but you find it beautiful anyway, and you allow this, because allowing small beauties is one of the things you've decided to keep doing regardless of how tired you are, because the alternative is to stop noticing them, and you have the very clear sense that if you stop noticing them, they will not come back. London. The whole thing is out there, past this small window, in the dark and the gaslit amber haze. You have been in London for 6 months. You have learned, in 6 months, specific things about specific places. The route to the greengrocer, the route to the butcher, the particular feel of Chester Square's flagstones under your feet versus the smaller cobbles of the side streets. The fact that the bakery on Ebury Street does a bread that is better than the bread delivered to the house, and Mrs. Hartley has been informed of this and has opinions. You have learned that London rain is different from Shropshire rain, heavier in the air, more grey, less clean. You have learned that London cold is different from Shropshire cold, in the way that your mother's cold kitchen was different from the cold of a winter field. Enclosed cold is worse than open cold somehow, because it has nowhere to go. You've not yet been to any of the things that people come to London to see, not the National Gallery or the museum or the parks. You have walked through the edge of St. James's Park once on a Sunday afternoon, when Mrs. Crawford gave you 2 hours, and you had walked without knowing quite where you were going, and ended up at the edge of the park and stood there for a while, looking at the ducks on the lake, which had seemed, after 6 months of Chester Square, almost impossibly green and alive, the grass and the water and the ducks and the smell of earth and leaves. You had not had time to go further and had gone back, but you've thought about it since. The park, the sense of something larger and more breathing than the enclosed stone world of the house. That is London from this window, on this October night in 1887. A gas lamp, the sound of a horse, the amber sky, the particular distance of everything, the city going on its enormous business, the families in their houses, the people in the streets, the river somewhere to the south that you have crossed once on an errand in your first month, and which frightened you slightly with its size and darkness, and the way the boats moved on it with such purpose. And in the morning it will begin again. The ice in the basin, the cold floor, the back stairs in the dark. But that is morning. Right now you are here, at this window, for as long as you permit yourself to stand here, which is perhaps 3 minutes, perhaps 4. The length of time it takes for your feet and your back and your hands to make their full case, that you should be horizontal, that you should be done, that the day has given everything it has to give, and you have given everything you have to give back to it, and there is nothing left to exchange. You turn from the window, you sit on the edge of the bed, your boots first. You undo the laces, your fingers are slow and slightly clumsy, the tiredness in them showing itself in this small mechanical task. And you pull the boots off and set them on the floor, with the particular care of someone who knows they will need them again in 7 hours. Your feet. The relief of the boots off is a distinct physical sensation, not quite pain, and not quite pleasure, something between the two, the body reasserting its own shape after hours inside the leather. You remove your apron, your cap, your dress. You fold the dress over the chair because it needs to last until Wednesday, and there is no room for carelessness with clothes when you have 3 dresses. You unpin your hair, and the release of tension in your scalp as the pins come out is another of those specific pleasures that live in the body, small and distinct and very real. The hairpins go on the little shelf above the bed. In your nightgown, under the thin blanket, you lie back. The straw mattress which seemed, when you arrived, like the least comfortable thing you'd ever been asked to sleep on, has been shaped over 6 months by your body and Ellen's body. The straw pressed and settled into a kind of familiar resistance that your body has learned to read as comfort. This is called adaptation, you suppose, getting used to things. Your body gets used to the hard floor in the scullery, gets used to the temperature of the water in the washing basin, gets used to the thin blanket that isn't quite enough, and the mattress that isn't quite soft, and the room that isn't quite warm enough, gets used to it, and then, gradually, begins to read these things as normal, as the baseline, as just the way things are. There is something about this that troubles you sometimes. The getting used to things, the way the things that seemed impossible in March seem ordinary in October. Because there is a version of this that is resilience, and there is a version of this that is the erasure of the sense that things could be different, and you are not always certain which one is happening. But tonight you are too tired to think carefully about this. Tonight you are in the category of things that are simply true. Tired, warm enough, safe enough, done enough. Outside, London breathes. The gas lamp on the corner is still burning, you know. though you can't see it from here, from the bed. It will burn until the lamplighter comes around again in the early morning to extinguish it, walking his route with the long-handled snuffer, touching the flame out one by one, the streets going dark behind him. This is a job that someone does, the lamplighter, one of the thousands of jobs that London requires to function, one of the invisible mechanisms that keeps the city's visible life in operation. You think about Mrs. Hartley and her 31 years. You think about the sauce that broke and was fixed. You think about the beef on the spit and the way the smell of it filled the kitchen for 2 hours and the way the guests upstairs ate it without, you imagine, you assume, any particular thought about the spit or the hours on it, or the person who had managed the heat underneath it. You think about Miss Harriet's face when you gave her the bread and the cold chicken, the uncomplicated gratitude in it, the way she looked at you as if you were someone who had done something important, as if feeding a 12-year-old girl a piece of bread and cold chicken between luncheon and tea was a genuinely significant act, which it was in its small way. Every small thing is significant in its small way. This is something you have been learning, or possibly something you always knew and are remembering. Your mother used to say, "Good work is good work, whether anyone sees it or not." She said this about making beds and doing laundry and scrubbing the kitchen table, and about the whole long ordinary work of keeping a household alive, the work that nobody notices unless it stops being done. You thought, when she said it, that she was trying to make you feel better about work that was thankless. Now you think she meant it more simply and more truly than that good work is its own completion, that the black-leaded range is right whether anyone knows you did it or not, that the soup that tasted good, that these things are real, and the realness of them doesn't depend on being observed. You're not certain this is entirely true. You think it might be a useful belief rather than a correct one. But it is getting you through, and getting through is not nothing, and the difference between a useful belief and a correct one is tonight too philosophical a question to sustain. The piano is still playing distantly below you and above you simultaneously somehow, the notes coming up through the fabric of the house. Chopin, you think, something slow and decided, with a sadness that is not a personal sadness, but the sadness that lives in certain kinds of music, a sadness that is more like a colour than a feeling. You listen to it for a while, you didn't plan to, but the piano is playing and you are horizontal and the day is finished, and the blanket is pulled up to your chin, and the attic room is cold, but your body has made its own warmth under the blanket, and the sound of the music is arriving at the exact frequency of things that are happening to you rather than things you have to do, and so you listen. Your hands ache, the particular ache of hands that have worked all day in water and friction and pressure, an ache that goes into the joints, the knuckles, the base of the thumbs. Tomorrow the first thing you will feel is that ache, before even the cold floor, before even the ice in the basin. The hands will report first, they always report first, but that is tomorrow. There is something important about that phrase that you have discovered recently, and not through thinking about it, but through living it. There is tomorrow and there is now, and they are not the same thing, and in the long space of a day like this one, the ability to keep them separate is genuinely useful. Tomorrow has its own demands. Tonight, right now, in this moment, in this specific hour, you are warm enough, you are full enough, you are safe enough, which is to say, you're in your bed in a house that is solid and known, and whose sounds you can interpret and whose demands you can meet. The music drifts up, your eyes are heavy, the weight of 17 hours settling through your body. the body deciding quietly that consciousness is no longer the most useful state to be in. You think briefly about the view from the attic window, the gas lamp, the wet pavement, the amber sky, the city going about its business in the dark. Somewhere in that city right now, there are people whose lives look like the drawing room. There are people whose lives look like the scullery. There are people working through the night in bakeries and printing houses and hospitals, people sleeping in doorways, people in warm beds in warm rooms behind well-curtained windows. There are people who have never seen the inside of a kitchen unless they were visiting it to give instructions. And there are people who have never been anywhere but the kitchen. And there are people like you who are in between, who are becoming something, who have not yet arrived at whatever they are going to be. You are 14 years old. You came to London 6 months ago from a farm in Shropshire, with a letter of introduction that your mother wrote in her careful round hand, and a bundle of clothes, and enough fear that you were sick on the coach, and had to apologize to the woman sitting next to you, who was very kind about it. You have been cold and tired, and your hands have been in water, and your back has ached, and you have carried coal and scrubbed iron and peeled 17 potatoes, and made short crust pastry, and helped save a consommé, and fed a 12-year-old girl a piece of bread in a corridor, and worked 17 hours and reached this bed and this blanket and this thin approximate warmth. And the year is not over. The years are not over. There are years ahead of you in which you will carry more coal and scrub more iron and wake to more ice in more basins. There will be years in which Mrs. Hartley will teach you more things about sauces and pastry and the precise management of a fire. There will be years in which you may become a cook yourself. If you are good enough and determined enough, and if the luck holds, and if the work keeps being the work that it appears to be rather than something worse, there will be years in which something else might happen, something you cannot see from here, because from here you can only see the ceiling of the attic room and the faint moonlight through the small window, and you can only hear the piano getting slower, the Chopin winding down toward its end. You cannot know. Nobody knows. But you know the next step, which is sleep, and that is enough. Knowing the next step is always enough. The piano finishes. The last note holds for a moment in the air of the house, and then it's done, and the house settles into the quiet of late evening. The guests' departing sounds beginning. The front door, the street door, the sound of carriages, voices saying goodbye in the particular social register of people who have had a good dinner and are warm and are going back to their own warm houses. And these sounds filter up through the house and through the floors and through the ceiling of the attic room and arrive at you as the faintest possible evidence that the world is still going about its business, and you are going to sleep. Your eyes close. The darkness of the attic room is complete now, the window showing nothing but the amber sky of London, and the sounds are fading, or you are fading from them, which amounts to the same thing, and the ache in your hands is becoming simply a warmth, the ache in your back a pressure you are sinking away from rather than carrying. Ellen will come up soon. You will hear her at the door, the familiar sound of it, and you will be almost asleep and she will be quiet, the way you are quiet for her on the mornings you rise first. The mutual consideration that is one of the things that makes the room livable, that makes the cold and the closeness and the thin mattress livable. The basic fact of another person in the room who understands what the day has been. But that is later. Right now it is just you. You've been on your feet since 5 a.m. You have lit no fires and polished no silver and arranged no flowers and played no piano. You have done the things that make all of those things possible. You've been the foundation on which the visible house rests, the part of the mechanism that never shows, the labour that is everywhere in the result and nowhere in the credit. And tomorrow you will do it again. The ice in the basin, the cold floor, the black lead and the brush and the aching knuckle and the careful work that never ends, the potatoes, the vegetables, the stock that needs 6 hours and the soup that needs tasting, and the pastry that needs resting, and the constant work of keeping 17 people alive and fed and comfortable in a house that they think of as simply home. Tomorrow, that is tomorrow. Tonight in the attic room where Victorian servants slept, the gas lamp still burns on the corner of Chester Square, and London breathes its amber breath into the October sky, and the house at number 14 settles into its nighttime rhythms, and you are warm enough, and the day is done, and your hands are still, and your eyes are closed, and your breathing slows. The city will not be quiet tonight. This city is never quiet. There are streets where things are still happening, where the sounds of the night are different from the sounds of the day, but just as full. There are kitchens still running in the hotels and the clubs and the chop houses. There are people carrying things, cleaning things, moving through the dark of the city on their own specific errands. The river, somewhere to the south, is running in the dark the way it always runs, the way it has been running for longer than the city has existed, indifferent to all of it. But up here, in the attic, the work is done. Let the day go. Let it go the way it came, one thing at a time, the hours unwinding in reverse, the last thing last, the first thing first, the black-leaded range and the cold basin, and the dark of the room at 5 in the morning growing softer and softer, and finally, sleep good night.